The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and also by the donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your most generous support. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 191. The Veteran Wargamer joint podcast and review of Command & Colours, with hosts Neil Shuck, Mike Hobbs and Mike Whitaker, and guest and co-host, the Veteran Wargamer himself, J. Arnold. Welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. I'm your host, Neil Shuck, being slightly croaky voiced, and I am joined on this show by another croaky voiced person. In fact, I think earlier I accused him of passing his virus to me when we last recorded the show together. The Welsh Wizard himself, Mr. Michael Hobbs. Hello, sir.
Hello. How are you doing?
Other than the fact I think I've caught your germs, I'm all right, mate. How you doing? You all right?
I'm okay, and you shouldn't click on any links of any emails I send you. You know, that way leads them to madness.
They might have a virus.
Indeed. I just didn't realise it wasn't a computer one. Never mind. And of course we have with us as well the Phantom Cake Snatcher of old Peterborough town. It's Mr. Mike Whitaker. Hello, mate.
Hello. You alright?
Yeah, not so bad. How you doing?
Oh, not so bad.
Good. Unfortunately, Mr. Luff can't join us on this particular show because he's too busy packing to go on a holiday. So there we go. Never mind. Right, on today's show, we have something slightly different from our usual fare. Mr. Hobbs, I'll let you explain.
Oh, thank you. There's another podcast out there called the Veteran Wargamer Podcast, which is run by a very nice chap called J. Arnold. And we were chatting on Twitter, and we came up with this mad idea of doing a combined show where we would each put out essentially 2/3 of a shared interview and discussion point segment. So in this show, on the Meeple and Miniature side, you're going to listen to us interview Jay about his life in gaming and what he's doing on the podcast. And then you're going to hear a long discussion about Command & Colours. But if you also subscribe to Jay's podcast, which is the Veteran Wargamer, you'll be able to listen to him interview us and the same discussion on Commands and Colours. So if you want to listen to all 3 segments, you've got to listen to both podcasts. And this is just a way for us to sort of highlight what Jay's doing, because he's got a nice podcast, he's a nice relaxed manner, he's a nice bloke, and we thought we'd just do something a little bit different. So that's what's happening today.
Indeed. To second that, and Jay's got a far more focused show in the fact of his shows are only an hour. So, or thereabouts. So if nothing else, we've completely blown that out the water for him.
Yeah.
On this particular one. But no, he's covered some really interesting subjects already. I'll reiterate, that show is well worth listening to. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we will have our interview with the Veteran Wargamer himself, Mr. J. Arnold.
I don't like it, Sergeant. Me neither, sir. Good Lord, it's really looking pretty bad. Yes, sir. It happens every time, sir. It's too predictable, sir. How far do you think we've advanced, Sergeant? 6 inches, sir. It's always 6 inches. We advance 6 inches, then Jerry gets a go. The lads are are calling it Hi-Go Hugo, sir. Hi-Go Hugo? Good grief. And they don't like it, sir. Oh. Oh, not like it? Seems pretty straightforward to me, rather like cricket. We have an innings, then the other chap does. Well, that's all very well, sir, cricket, sir, but begging your pardon, it ain't like that, sir, in war. I don't think Mr. Hitler plays like that. What, Hitler? No, gosh, he'd like to go all the time. Oh, no, sir, lummy. Well, sir, anyway, sir, it's like this, sir. If it carries on like this, Hi-Go Hugo, me and the lads won't be coming to your Thursday evening games club, and that's the way it is, sir. Looking for more of a challenge with your World War II games? Are you tired of the predictability of Hi-Go Hugo systems? Iron Bean Shopman provides real command challenges on an unpredictable battlefield. Two fat lardies, playing the period and not the rules since 2002. Pip pip.
Have you ever wondered what's going on in wargaming? We do too. So come with us as we go behind the hobby with the Meeples and Miniatures interview. We're very pleased to welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, long-time listener to the show and now fellow podcaster, Mr. J. Arnold. Hello, sir.
Good morning for me, good afternoon for you guys.
Good morning. Well, first off, dedication to the cause, sir. 6 a.m. Or there or thereabouts on a Sunday morning is above and beyond the call of duty, sir. So good morning to you.
Oh, it's not a problem at all. Not a problem. This is not the small hours by any means, so we're okay.
Cool. Well, welcome to the show, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
As we explained, we had this crazy idea about actually doing a crossover podcast between our podcast and Jay's The Veteran Wargamer, and we're going to interview each other. So we'll get right into it. First off, Jay, as a long-term listener, you know what we do next, which is obviously you're a new guest on the show. So the first thing we'd like to do, and now I know anyone who's listened to the Veteran Wargamer knows something about this already. But can you give us a 2-minute intro into, intro into how you got into gaming?
Okay, folks, get your Meeples and Miniatures bingo cards out. Because, yes, for me it started with proper miniatures wargaming. For me, started with Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. And I got a box of the Plastic Marines, the original Plastic Marines, RTB-01.
RTB-01, Beaky Marines, good
That's
man.
Right. Yeah. A box of the Marauding Orcs, and a whole passel of blisters of Space Pirates and Adventurers, plus the 40K RT book for Christmas one year. And that's what opened it up. Sadly, most of those Plastic Marines are gone. I sold off the Metal Orcs. Believe it or not, I still have almost all of the Adventurers and Space Pirates that I first got. So they're patiently waiting for me to get off my duff and do some sci-fi skirmish gaming. Mm-hmm. After that, my brother and I were big fans of the Star Trek Tactical Space Combat Simulator from FASA. And then we just...
Sorry, was that before Starfleet Battles?
Technically, I think it came out after Starfleet Battles, but it's a much more streamlined system. Uses D10s.
That's not difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much anything will be more streamlined than Starfleet Battles. It was a bit clunky.
Yeah, and as I've heard it referred to as Starfleet accounting. And
spreadsheet battles.
Yes. And then things just progressed from there. Over time, I got further and further, mostly into Games Workshop stuff, and was playing a couple of board games. I'm not going to say seriously, but pretty regularly, such as the Old Avalon Hill Civilization and Advanced Civilization. Moved further into historical gaming. I actually got into historical gaming after I got off active duty with the Army. Was kind of in a group that was not quite game of the month, but over the course of 2 or 3 years, I probably bought into 4 or 5 major game systems such as Clan War and Warzone and Demon World, for example. Did some cowboys and pirates and started getting into ancients, and it's just gone on from there. So now I'm living in a little town of about 1,000, which is about an hour from anything. And so at this point, I'm pretty much relegated to getting a couple of things together a year, and slowly, I might add. But over the last couple of years, I've started hosting an annual gaming weekend for my friends and me at a local winery. And that's been my focus for gaming.
Oh, nothing could go wrong there.
No, absolutely nothing can go wrong there. We keep it pretty sedate. There's the winery has a lodge attached to it, so we stay in the lodge, and there's no drunk driving incidents or anything like that. So we're all safely contained for 2 nights and 3 days, and it's just a real nice thing. Actually, next weekend is my brother's of that same weekend. It's basically the same core group. He holds his in January. I hold mine in July. So and then we try to get to conventions in the area best we can, especially recruits, which you can hear about on the second episode of my podcast. And that's actually held at the high school where my brother and I went in Lee Summit, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. And then somewhere along the line, I started listening to podcasts, and early on in my podcast listening, I cabbaged onto one called Meeples and Miniatures, and now here we are.
It's always good to get into the classics, that's what I say. So what made you decide to start your own podcast when there's so many excellent ones already out there?
There are so many excellent ones out there, so I figured I might as well add a crappy one.
Oh no, there's lots of those as well.
Well, I've enjoyed a number of different podcasts. Of course, there's Meeples and Miniatures. Of course, there's View from the Veranda, which is hands down my favorite podcast. I also listen to the D6 Generation and Wargaming Recon, Ludology, which is great because it talks purely about almost not quite game theory, but picks a single topic and stays with it for the entire show, which is, that's the format I've gone for. And I thought, I'd like to do something along those lines because I think it's a great community, and I think I've got a unique voice to add, being an actual veteran of combat operations. And I thought maybe I could add a different voice to the community. And I decided, well, if I'm going to do it, I better do it. So it took about 2 days to get the underpinnings, the basics taken care of, as far as finding a name that hasn't been used and getting it registered to the blog spot for my blog and all that, and getting the Twitter handle. And then I decided, well, I'm just going to get a halfway decent microphone and get some recording software and go at it.
That's sort of similar to what you did, Neil, wasn't it? During your quiet years.
Oh yeah, the quiet years when I didn't know about things called things like Levelator and couldn't use Audacity properly and stuff like that. Yeah,
and didn't have a decent mic.
No. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Yes. What was that? Number one rule of podcasting: first off, get yourself a decent mic.
Yeah. So you got to.
As you say, as far as the Veteran Wargamer is concerned, you're taking things slightly differently in the fact of, you're talking about wargaming, but you're concentrating on a particular subject each time. And what we're up to, well, as we record this, was it 7 episodes? I think it is.
Yes, our joint episode will be episode 8.
How have you found it so far?
I've had a lot of fun doing it. Just interacting on Twitter and Facebook with the listeners, coming up with the show ideas has been fun. Actually getting people to come on the show.
Yeah, actually, how do you do that?
I just think, what do I want to talk about for an hour? And I write it down, and then I figure out, okay, who'd be a good guest for that? To my surprise, getting guests to actually say, yeah, I'll come on has been pretty easy. It helps that I've been asking primarily people that I already know or at least already have contact with. So that's been a huge help. And it's not just what I want to talk about, it's also what I'm working on. So, of course, later on in this episode when we talk about Commands and Colors, that's probably my favorite game. And if folks have been following my Twitter and Facebook feeds know that I've been working on a Commands and Colors fantasy variant. Yes, I know I heard about Battle Lore, but and we'll talk about more, I'm sure.
Yeah,
but,
sure. Yeah.
It's just things that interest me, and due to starting the podcast, I'm become more aware and more interested in what's going on in the industry, and that's provided some ideas also. So when new things pop up, I can take a look, and I've got a pretty short turnaround on my shows. I do them every 2 weeks, and it takes me about an hour and a half to record, maybe about another hour and a half to edit and get the show notes together, get it uploaded to SoundCloud. If push comes to shove, I think if something really huge happens, I need to really get on, then I've got that ability to turn it around. I'm fully prepared to do a show solo if I have to, and we'll go from there. Just speaking solely from the downloads I have, my first episode is still my most popular. I'm not sure exactly why, but things are slowly increasing as far as listenership. So and it amazes me that the older episodes still get downloads as I look at the stats. I would imagine you guys probably have the same observation.
Yeah, you always tend to be a thing where, some people, if they haven't come across your podcast before, they will always go and listen to episode 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to kind of get an idea of it. For those podcasts that have been going for a number of years, for example, I would not recommend now going back and listening to episode 1 of Meeples and Miniatures because it has changed beyond all recognition.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we're still getting lots of downloads for older shows because you constantly have more people coming on board. And of course, the other thing is that, especially as you end up with more focused shows, in the same way that we're looking at slightly more focused shows in a lot of what we do. You get a lot of people diving in and out and being a little bit more picky and choosy in what they want to listen to. I mean, obviously, that's the whole thing with the podcast, isn't it? It's the fact that people can decide what they want to listen to. Now, there are some people down there that it doesn't matter what you're talking about, they'll listen to it. But there are other people who are a little bit more picky and choosy in what they want to listen to. So that's where you tend to get a lot of the variance in your downloads.
Right. And it makes perfect sense.
So, Jay, what sort of thing can we look forward to on the Veteran Wargamer coming up this year?
Well, you can certainly look forward to a number of authors, not just necessarily wargame authors, but I've got a couple of novelists lined up. Folks might know Howard Whitehouse. He's written a number of novels aimed primarily at the adolescent market, including the seminal Zombie Elementary, as well as a number of wargame rules for Pulp Action Library. I've also got an author named Joe Zija coming on. He is the author of a novel named Mechanical Failure. It's a science fiction novel set on a Navy ship that is on duty for a country on the brink of war, but it's got a humorous bent to it. Anybody that's been in the military will instantly recognize a number of the situations that are presented in the novel. And I'm looking forward to having both Howard and Joe on. We've got Henry Hyde coming on later. I'm going to record with Henry in February. We've already got the time and date selected for that. And
cool.
And of course, as new games come up, we'll talk about that. With my brother's game weekend coming up next week, I might do some live stuff with the guys there, and maybe have that as a segment or even a show unto itself. It remains to be seen. So I'm really excited. Things are looking up. More coverage. I hope to do more blog posts also. Most recently, I did a blog post about a gaming project that my son has undertaken with me of designing his own space science fiction skirmish game. So check out the blog. That's theveteranwargamer.blogspot.com for that.
And obviously there'll be a link to that in our show notes.
Yes.
Awesome.
Just to warn you, when you get Henry on, don't expect to have an hour-long show, mate.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Took about 3 or 4 hours. And,
No, that's A-okay. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah. Probably about 2 questions tops as well.
Yes.
I'll be
all
fair,
good.
maybe three.
Yeah, it's all nice to have a backup. Yeah, get coffee in and some sandwiches, and basically just get comfy.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but I am hoping that I can kind of steer him to the point where he mentions banana oil.
Oh, 30 seconds.
Oh, that would be difficult.
The keyword there is airfix models, and then
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is the dude from the veranda is not the first time I'd heard the phrase banana oil. At least in the U.S. Army, that is used to make sure that your protective mask is sealing properly. If you can smell the banana oil, then your mask isn't sealed properly, and if you can't, then you're good to go. Don't ask me why they settled on banana oil. I guess it. To be honest, I've never actually smelled it because my mask has always worked. But does it have a particularly strong aroma? I take it, or
I would imagine so, but I do not know from practical experience.
I've never used it. I just think it's made up. I think it's just been kidnapped.
I always used to use PVA.
As we got you here, we a little while ago we were chatting to Sam Mustafa about the sort of state of the American hobby, because he's obviously got some concerns around the lack of sort of designers and manufacturers and the sort of general state of historical gaming, really, I suppose, in the US. As you're from those sort of parts, I wanted to see if you had a sort of similar feel to how the hobby is going over there.
That's an interesting question. I know that one thing that's certainly helped recently, and if people aren't taking advantage of it, it's their own fault, is the disparity between the British pound and the dollar. I'm not going to say that's increased my buying recently, but I know that folks have the opportunity to buy more than they have in a long time. So I'm not so sure that it's that big of an issue, especially when you've got so many rules being released exclusively on PDF. I know I've bought a number of products from Two Fat Lardies and from Polkovnik, Sword and Spear, that it doesn't matter that they're not in the US, I guess. I'm not sure that that's a detriment. I don't buy that much throughout the year anyway, so it's not that big a deal to me. I do know that, I went to the Fall In convention in Pennsylvania late October, early November. I forget exactly when. I guess it was early November. And there were a lot of trade stands there, including a lot of manufacturers. Brigade Games, for example, they've got they're interesting because they are their own manufacturer, but they're also a distributor for other companies. In fact, they run the Nick starters from North Star in the United States.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. That actually might be worth getting Lon from Brigade Games on my show. Don't steal the guest, Neil. But that'd be an interesting question for Lon, actually.
Don't they resell Two Fat Lardies in the States as well?
Yeah, they do.
Yes, absolutely. I ran into him at Historicon, but he was slightly too busy for a chat, so you're safe.
Yeah. Well, we've got GHQ here. We've got PFC CNC, so that's probably 90% of the modern and historical 6mm market for things with tracks anyway. We've got Brigade. They do a number of historical lines in 28mm. The big differentiation between gaming in the UK and possibly on the continent and then in the United States, the difference, the big difference everyone talks about is the difference in the shows that we have. They mostly seem to be, from my listening and my observation, they mostly seem to be opportunities for people to buy product and to see clubs put on a game in the UK. Now, I understand, thanks to your excellent coverage, that is changing. There's more participation games going on, especially in Peterborough. Is that correct, Mike?
That would be true.
And
we do our best. And actually, the two big shows near us, which are Hammerhead and the two Partisans, are also very much moving towards an emphasis on participation rather than demo.
Yeah. And in the United States, they're mostly 1, maybe 2 day affairs, whereas in the United States, most shows are a minimum of 2 days.
Well, but there's also the big distinction that from what I saw at Historicon, because we're a 1 day show, you have to sort of encourage people to produce a game that people can either dip into or a go at is 20 minutes to half an hour.
Right.
Because everybody's all. Whereas Historical, it's clearly a case of I shall go and I shall play that game for 3 hours. And then I shall do the dealer's room, and then I shall go and play that game for 4 hours.
Right. And was Historicon at the host in Lancaster? You recall?
It was Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg, okay.
Yeah, it was.
Well,
I think it's the last one at in Fredericksburg, isn't it? They're moving it.
I gotta respect Sam's views. He's got a much different perspective on it than I do, of course, actually being in the industry. I'm only kind of tangentially connected to the industry because I'm a playtester for Ambush Alley games, and that's as far as it goes, though. And I know some people that are in the industry, but I don't know if it's that big of a deal. You know, when you get to the point where a single product, the shipping for a single product is worth more than the product itself, I can kind of see that. But that just encourages people to buy larger orders, I guess.
I mean, the thing that interests me is your key sponsor, which is King's Hobbies. They've set themselves up as a 3D printing studio, haven't they?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really great to see what Tim's been doing, kind of following along, and he's able to get those small, I don't want to say small, but the small production run vehicles, your weird little Czech tanks with a obscure German gun slapped on top just to make sure it would work, and they went ahead and made 5 of them, that sort of thing. And there's a certain
the Führer must have a Pack 40 on every available chassis.
Right. Exactly. No, it's worked out extremely well for him, and I've got some of his products myself, and before he was ever a sponsor, and just because I've known Tim for quite some time, and he's a friend, and I wanted to support him, and I had a particular need. I said, hey, I want some science fiction cargo and storage type modules. Yeah, not a problem. Oh, hey, I want some type of biocontainment unit. Yeah, no problem. So it's interesting that not only is he able to respond to his customers' requests, but in the case of what he did for me, because I'd imagine he went out to Thingiverse or was able to go somewhere and get the designs quickly. I had a pretty quick turnaround on my requests anyway. I want to say that from the time I said, hey, I'd like to see if you can do X, Y, and Z, I had X, Y, and Z in my grubby little paws in about a week and a half.
See, obviously, previous Grumpy Gamers sections on copyright thereof.
Right. It's definitely interesting the way that's going, and I gotta think that within 10 years, I think in about 10 years we'll be able to have in our home a halfway decent, maybe not great, but at least a halfway decent figure printed up where you can do 28 millimeter gaming with the stuff that you print, and it will be vaguely economical.
And it'll be less than 10 years. See previous argument with Hobbsy.
I'll settle on 7. Let's just compromise on 7.
5 at most.
But I think that Tim's positioned himself to where he stands, if he keeps with it and is able to grow and expand and keep going, he'll be considered an industry leader in that, I feel. And that's just a matter of, he saw a need for it and exercised his Yankee ingenuity and made it happen.
Yeah, because I was trying to think of anybody over here who does 3D printing on demand.
Me very shortly.
Yes, but I haven't got a shop.
I have PE2 collectibles.
That is true. You heard it here first.
There you go. So, what I'm looking for, Mike, is...
I also have a printer whose head is currently away being serviced, so you can't have anything for 2 weeks.
You've only had it for a month or so, and you've broken it already. I don't know.
This is why we can't have nice things.
This is one of the nice things about that particular printer, is that it's got a full return to base warranty for a year. And if you're actually using it professionally, they will give you we will give you a new working printer on your doorstep within a day if it breaks. Coverage as well if you want, which is really quite handy for this kind of thing. I'm not sure I shall get that, but being able to just say, look, this head is not behaving itself, stick it in a box and have the replacement turn up in a week is pretty good compared to some of the do-it-yourself ones where you'd be sitting there getting yourself covered in hot filament and screwdrivers and little fiddly bits for a week to get it working again.
Well, some people like that, though, Mike.
Some of us would rather get on and do the fun bits of the hobby, and I'm not an engineer. I could probably persuade my son to do it, but I'm not as sufficient of an engineer to want to do that bit of it. I'd rather pay someone else.
What's the phrase? We digress.
This is a Meeples podcast. You weren't expecting anything else?
Next up on the 3D printing podcast.
Indeed.
But to get back to the original question, I wonder if the distances the United States involved limit the direct interaction that you enjoy in the UK with your manufacturers and publishers at various shows. I wonder if that inhibits, or I wonder if the distances involved in the United States inhibit some of that, because I know from speaking to the publishers and manufacturers that I do know, it's difficult to get everywhere in the United States. I know in the case of Brigade Games, they pretty much hit the big East Coast HMGS conventions, and I'm not sure they go to many more. Lon's based out of New Jersey, so that might be a contributing factor also. As to what, you don't have that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. I'm going to do my one rule book and go to a couple of the smaller shows because they're an hour and a half, 2 hours away. And then next thing you know, this thing's gaining steam, and I can go ahead and make a second game or a third game and keep going. So I wonder if, for a small, just starting out company, there isn't that capacity here in the United States just because we are so spread out.
Interestingly, that kind of goes into a subject I was about to ask you about again. I mean, and again, we go back to subjects we've looked at a couple of times in the difference between the hobby in the UK and the US. I mean, you were saying about the fact that now you live in a small town and you release an hour's drive from anywhere, and how that limits your hobby.
Right.
Interestingly enough, if that, from a UK point of view, in the UK, you drive for an hour and you can get to an awful lot of places.
Right.
I don't know if it's too much of a generalisation to say that the UK seems to be more of a club-based hobby than the US, but again, maybe that's just one of those things of because of all the distances involved and the fact that you can slot the UK into most states in the US and several times for some of them. That whole demographic, with not only are you much nearer to manufacturers and publishers, but you're much nearer to everybody else who might be a potential opponent. That has a huge influence on how the hobby actually operates in what you do.
Yeah, I can only imagine that's the case because a number of your clubs are also based out of civic buildings, aren't they?
I would suggest that actually the majority are.
Yeah, council halls or church halls and that sort of thing. So that immediately increases the public visibility of it. Whereas the United States, unless I miss my mark, the majority are, majority of folks are either playing at a shop because we do have, relatively cheap real estate and the shop can afford to have, an additional or even two additional storefronts in a strip mall for gaming, or, the building's deep enough that they can have a back room for gaming. Or it's in basements, or rumpus rooms, or someone's den, or whatever space in their home.
That's again all to do with American real estate and the fact that you can afford to have a house with a basement.
Right. Well, a basement's just directly, it's the same footprint as your house, but it's not something that you want to go into lightly, and you got to pretty much start from the beginning. But I believe in some of the tonier neighborhoods in London, people are starting to dig basements under their existing structures. One of my customers was talking about this, actually. He had seen a documentary on that. People in London, again, in the richer neighborhoods, are building their own basements and under their existing homes for exorbitant amounts of money.
Quite an interesting problem with that, which is that you probably have to get an archaeologist in.
Yeah, there is that too.
quite seriously, because
yeah.
if you're building on top of Rome and London, they won't let you do that lightly.
Well, that also speaks to the big difference between the UK and the United States, is that in the UK, 100 miles is a long distance, and in the United States, 100 years is a long time.
I like that.
I definitely want to get over to the UK sometime, hopefully during Salute or one of the big shows like Peterborough. Yeah, I definitely want to get over there. I want to see Warhammer World. I want to see, well, just everything in Nottingham as far as the hobby's concerned. You know, the museums in London, Bovington, all that. So, yeah, I'd like to see that firsthand, not just at a show, but also like a club night somewhere, just to see how things go down. You know, failing Salute, I'd love to go to the Ayton gathering. Yes. Henry and his friends run the Big Imaginations game all weekend. So that's...
Oh, trust me, that is great fun.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
and yeah, come along and we'll happily have you.
Oh, do you go to that, Mike?
I've been to a couple of them, yes. They are brilliant fun. They're absolutely fantastic fun.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, that's the Ayton event is it's a significant contributor to me wanting to do this huge Commands and Colors game. So we'll talk about that more, I'm sure.
I've got one more question. Now, considering you're a playtester for Ambush Alley, I probably already know the answer. But, okay, now I'm a huge fan of modern era wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's Vietnam or moving forward through to, Iraq, Afghanistan. But it causes, well, there are a lot of people who have issues with it and really question whether we should be doing that at all. Now, obviously, you're a combat veteran. You served in Afghanistan?
That's correct. And Bosnia back in the 90s.
Right. So you're a combat veteran, so you have and a wargamer. So you obviously are somebody who's been there and done it for real, and now you're a tabletop gamer. What are your thoughts on gaming modern periods? So gaming Afghanistan, for example.
Well, of course, for the long answer, I would direct you to my episode on modern wargaming that I recorded with Tim Spakowski. The short answer is I don't have a problem with it. I think there's definitely value to be gained from just taking a look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by both coalition forces and insurgent forces. And I use that term insurgent forces as a blanket over groups like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Haqqani group, the Haqqani network, stuff like that. I don't have a problem with anybody wanting to do that as long as, and it's just like any other topic. There's certainly cultural sensitivities involved with colonial gaming, 19th century, 18th and 19th century colonial games. And you can realistically see how there would be sensitivities with ultra modern or very recent gaming in the same light. I know of folks who won't go near a Vietnam game, either because they themselves or a loved one was in Vietnam. To a certain degree, or in a similar fashion, my mom refused to watch any movie about Vietnam because she had lost too many friends there, and that's understandable. And I think, and it's just like anything else in the hobby, I think as long as you're going into it with the intent of getting some, again, I don't want to use the term educational, but some type of positive benefit from it aside from just playing a game.
And I think fundamentally, as long as you're going to treat it with respect.
Yeah, as long as you treat it with respect and it's coming from a place where you want to understand what went on or is going on, then I don't have a problem with that. That being said, I'm not ready to play an Afghanistan game. Tim brought a very nice Afghanistan game to one of my game weekends a couple of years ago, and it looked great. The figures were wonderful. They're 20 millimeter figures. The terrain looked great. It was spot on from my recollection. I couldn't play it though, but I played Iraq games, so maybe obviously I'm a little close to it, but I didn't have a problem with anybody running the game. Tim asked me beforehand if he could bring it, knowing that I was an Afghanistan vet. And I said, no, it's fine. It doesn't bother me. It's just I'm not there yet. And I don't say that to try to make it look like I'm some sort of grizzled war veteran of 1,000 campaigns and 1,000 firefights. To be perfectly honest, I was only in contact with the enemy one day, and I was in 3 firefights that one day, and that was it. And quite frankly, that was enough. But I'm just not there yet. I had some, I'm not going to say close friends killed, but guys in my battalion got killed. You know, a guy that was coming to replace us after we left, shortly after we left, he got killed. So I remember those guys, and maybe for that reason I don't want to do that. But then again, guys I know got killed and wounded in Iraq, and I don't have a problem with Iraq. So that might speak more to my psyche than the topic in general. But you know, I think, again, and it goes back, if you're treating with respect, if you're trying to get some type of, you know, some realistic benefit out of it, I don't have a problem with it, and I encourage it. In fact, now that being said, there are certain aspects of these conflicts that, while we shouldn't ignore them, I don't think they have a place in the hobby either. I struggled with possibly writing a Yugoslavia book for Ambush Alley, and I pitched it to Sean, and he said, "Yeah, that'd be a great idea." And then I started looking into it, and you know, really started thinking about it, and I thought, there's just no way to separate the atrocities from otherwise legitimate military operations. You just can't. To put it in perspective, it'd be like having a game about the Sonderkommando. You know, you can't do that. You know, you can read about it, and you should read about it just to remember and hopefully make sure that we do everything we can so that doesn't get repeated. But it's not an appropriate topic for a game.
Completely agree with that. Like you say, games should not force you, but give you the impetus to go and learn more about the conflict in general. And
I mean, the SS in World War II are an interesting borderline area there, aren't they?
Yeah, just by virtue of their association, both politically and militarily.
But then
or
again,
paramilitarily.
There are battles in World War II in which the SS were just another set of boots on the ground.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And that's not to say that Allied forces weren't guilty of atrocities either. I mean, everyone is at some point or another. Not everyone individually, but just about everyone organizationally. You know, at one point or another. I mean, that's why we have a uniform code of military justice in the United States. You know, to punish our own in those cases. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a huge topic and one that I spent an hour talking with Tim Spakowski about. But if your listeners want to go back and take a listen to it, it's one of the better conversations I've had on the show, to be honest with you.
Thank you. I'd encourage it, actually.
Episode 5, apparently.
Yeah, it's a subject that's cropped up a couple of times, and it's certainly one I've encountered in the past simply because of my particular love of ultra-modern gaming. And, and coming across, you know, lots of people who find it problematic. So, you know, really appreciate your input into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a similar vein, you know, episode 4 on reenactment, it's, you know, we cover some of the same ground.
Right, so we've had a nice chat with Jay, and now Jay's going to interview us three. But if you're listening to this on Meeples and Miniatures, you're not going to hear it. So if you want to hear the next segment, you have to go and download or subscribe, which I would advise, to the Veteran Wargamer Podcast. And then you can listen to the next segment, which is Jay talking to us.
This is a shout out from Dean Clark. Dean would like to give a shout out to Joe Crone of Watchful Eye Studio, author of Land of the Free Worlds. Good luck with your reload, mate. If you want to learn more about shoutouts, visit our Patreon page. The link is on the website. We hope that you're enjoying this episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you are, would you like to support us? There's a couple of ways of doing so. You can become a patron of the show by supporting us on our Patreon page. There you can give regularly every time we produce a show. Alternatively, you may want to give a one-off donation, and you can do that by using PayPal. For more details on both these options, please click on the Donate tab on our website, www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk.
Okay, and we are now back on the Veteran Wargamer and Meeples and Miniatures. This is Jay Arnold, your host for the Veteran Wargamer. I'm joined by...
I'm Neil Shuck from the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast.
And I'm Mike Hobbs. I'm Neil's co-host.
And I'm Mike Whitaker, and I'm Neil's other co-host.
Okay, and we are going to discuss my personal favorite game, Commands and Colors. Now, if you're not familiar already... Commands and Colors is not just a single game, but it's rather a system of games, for lack of a better term, that was originally published. Let's see, what's the first one? Battle Cry in 2000. Battle Cry is a Civil War game.
Sorry, can we stipulate about that? That's American Civil War game.
Yes, American Civil War game, not English Civil War or anything else. Battle Cry is an American Civil War game, first published by Avalon Hill, after they were bought by Hasbro. And in the year 2000, a World War II version called Memoir 44 was released in 2004. A fantasy and vaguely medieval version called Battle Lore was released in 2006.
It wasn't vaguely medieval, it was actually an alternative 100 Years' War.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and both Memoir 44 and Battle Lore were produced by a French company called Days of Wonder.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the game that got me into the Commands and Colors system, Commands and Colors Ancients, came out in 2006, and that's from GMT Games. In 2010, GMT also released Napoleonic, well, Commands and Colors Napoleonics. Then there's also Samurai Battles in 2013, published by Zvezda, the Russian miniature figure manufacturer. Now, the interesting thing about that box is it also came with a version of Zvezda's own rules called Art of Tactic. And then, let's see, there was... Oh, I got to back up a little bit. There's the Battles of Westeros game from 2010. That's from Fantasy Flight. That is a Game of Thrones song of... is it Fire and Ice or Ice and Fire? I forget which. I listened to the first book on audiobook and then gave up after that.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah. I mean, the big thing with that was that Days of Wonder sold the license to Battle Lore to Fantasy Flight, and then Fantasy Flight. Now, in part of that, Fantasy Flight basically discovered that they couldn't reproduce the base lore of Battle Lore because if they tried to do it, they'd go out of business because it simply wasn't financially viable to do it anymore. But so basically they bought this system, but they didn't have a game to go with it, which is where Battles of Westeros came, because they knew they could put something together. They had a license. They could use a set of rules. So that's where Battles of Westeros originally came from.
Then later on, there's a science fiction version called Abaddon, which is slightly different from the others, but still has the same core mechanisms. And then a second edition of Battle Lore came out in 2013 from Fantasy Flight. And then in 2015, Plastic Soldier Company released The Great War, which is World War I.
Yeah.
There's a... GMT is releasing... No, it's not GMT. There's another company that is doing an American War of Independence version to be released this year. They're calling it Tricorn, I believe. And so, which is interesting, it kind of brings the system full circle, because Richard Borges stated on another podcast that I believe that was actually the D6 generation, that Commands and Colors started life as an American War of Independence game, and then kind of morphed into these other eras.
Now, I'm willing to be corrected on this, but did I hear somewhere that as far as that came, the the miniatures for Tricorner are being provided by Plastic Soldier Company?
I believe so.
Did I get that right?
I think that's the case. I think that's the case. Which is going to be great because I think we need plastic figures for things other than World War II and moderns. And at least as far as historical and smaller scale, I should say. Your 15 mil figures. Because I think that's got the potential to open up these other eras to folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to get into it.
Of course, there is one more coming out this year by GMT, which is the medieval version.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, there's a medieval, and I'm a sucker for the GMT Commands and Colors product, so I'll probably end up getting it.
Yeah, I'm P500 on that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll need to make that happen. Now,
or impulse control, the lot of you.
No, it's not impulse control.
It's having PayPal already open, ready to go.
Now, one thing that's common amongst the games is it's card-based activation, in that each player holds a hand of cards, which indicates either a type of unit or a section of a battlefield or some other special circumstance that they can use to move their units on the field. You can see all of this and more, I'm sure, on Board Game Geek if you take a look at any one of those systems. But I guess one thing that I really like about the system is that it just plays so dang fast. It provides the feeling of a full miniatures war game that would normally take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to play out, but you're able to get through it in 45 minutes to an hour. And there's not a lot of charts. I mean, sure, you got to take a look at a chart to see, what the different capabilities of the various units are, but combat resolution, morale, all of that is handled with the throw of some dice. And where the colors comes in is that the different units have different colors associated with them. And at least for example, in the ancient system, a green unit is some type of light infantry or cavalry. A blue unit is a medium unit of infantry or cavalry, and then a red unit is a heavy, whether footed or mounted. And when you roll the dice, most of the systems have a 6-sided die. Battles of Westeros has an 8-sided die, and I've got some issues with why that is. But anyway, the 6-sided die, at least for Ancients, has one each of light, medium, and heavy. It's got crossed swords, which basically indicates an enhanced close combat factor. A banner, which is basically a morale resulting in, or could result in a retreat action, and then a helmet, which is basically influence from some type of leadership character. And you roll the dice, and you're either removing enemy units due to hits, or they're retreating, or you get additional hits because your commander's nearby. And it's very clean, it's very fast playing. There's no combat results table or +1 for this and -1 for that. Usually it's going to be a terrain effect, and normally it's just going to be, or not normally, it's just straight up number of dice change, up or down. It's real easy, in my experience, it's easy to teach new people how to play it, and it's one of those minutes to learn, lifetime to master things, in my opinion, because it's very subtle in how it works, and the interactions between the units, and I could gush on and on and on about it, but we actually have an agenda here. So each set has a number of dice, at least one deck of cards. Some of the other, Samurai Battles, I know, Battles of Westeros, Battle Lore, they each have an additional deck of cards. And now Napoleonics has an additional deck also with the...
Great Warders as well.
Yeah. Then, of course, there's a board, and it's a hex-based board, and they've got a number of terrain tiles that come with it. And, of course, just like any other game, terrain affects your units in one way or another, either through movement or combat resolution. And of course, there's a preset scenarios for each one. Each system has preset scenarios. I think I'll have to do some more looking. I know for a fact that Commands and Colors Ancients on their website has a cost point or point buy system established. I'm going to be playing a little bit with that here soon, and I'm sure it's got all the same problems that any other point system has. But that's going to be an interesting way to take it. So yeah, that's what's in the box.
Yeah, both editions of Battlelore have a scenario generator within them as something slightly different. In first edition, it was an expansion. In second edition, I think it's actually built into the base game, isn't it, Mike?
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you boil it all down, these games, they share some commonality. They're all hex-based, other than the Abaddon one, which we don't talk about. But they're all hex-based games. They have hexes for terrain. You have a scenario which tells you where the terrain goes and what units you start with. And then you have a deck of cards, and you have a hand of cards, and you play a card. It tells you what units you can activate. You do things with your units, and you essentially try to fulfill your victory conditions, which might be destroying enemy units or holding areas of the board. And as Jay said, it lasts about 45 minutes to an hour, and you can play a whole battle. But each of the games is subtly different. You might have different dice, you might have different types of units, you might have different cards in there, but they all have a very specific period feel to them. And that, I think, is the beauty of these games. And that's why I'm a real fanboy now. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, Hobbs only started playing it this year.
Last year. Yeah,
isn't that right?
Yeah.
Last year, okay. Yeah, sorry, 2016. So I'm forgetting we're in 2017.
Yes. Yeah, 2016. May put on. He played it with figures. He played the Napoleonic version with figures, and I played it and I loved it. And I went out and bought the Ancients game because at that stage you couldn't get the Napoleonic game, and that was it. Hooked, bought expansions. I've now got
scavenged around eBay.
No, I bought them all off various GMT or Amazon.
Or even the Napoleonics?
I ordered that.
Yeah, because they reprinted it.
I did a P500, so I ordered that. That was quite funny because it was 80 people who pre-ordered it, and I thought I'll just chuck in a pre-order because it'll be months. And the next month it's like, okay, your card's been charged and it'll be with you in the next 2 weeks. It's literally that quick. So
Oh yeah. It's quite a popular game, that one.
It is a bit, yeah.
Now, Mike, when you say that your friend was playing Napoleonics with miniatures, were those 6 mil or were they something larger?
They're 50 mil.
Okay.
Set them up with on 60 by 30 bases with sort of 3 or 4 figures on each base.
Mm-hmm.
It looked really good.
Yeah. Now, is that on the board that came with the game, or is that with something else? Because those hexes that come with the game, they're not very big.
No, that's on the hexes. What he did, he approached GMT and went, look, can I buy the boards, the cards, the terrain hexes, and the dice? And they went, yeah. And they sent it to him.
Oh, okay.
So he didn't go through the joy of putting stickers onto blocks.
But you can always do it with the big Callistra terrain hexes or similar, which produces a very pretty looking game.
Oh, it does.
Oh, yeah. I did look at that thinking, for the Ancients, because all my Ancients are based on 80 by 40 bases, and I thought, I could get the Callista hex terrain. And then when I worked out I need to spend about 200-300 quid on all the hexes plus all the terrain, I thought, actually, I don't think I want to play it that much.
Well, Mike, let me save you about $150. Litco makes a 4-inch hex stencil.
Yeah, that's not work, Jay.
Well,
I am the lazy wargamer. Have you not noticed this?
Well, the stencil's actually pretty easy to do. I've made a number of 4-inch hex mats, both for the standard Ancients game, the 13 by 9, and also for the Epic 26 by 9 board. And it doesn't take that long to do. You just roll the stencil out and use a marker to either draw in the lines or use the dots at the corners, and away you go. Yeah,
I've looked at things like some of the battle mats that you can get, which you can put hexes onto.
Yeah,
I've looked at those. But the problem I always find is you've got to have the terrain hexes, and you need so many of them. I just think, it's a board game. I'm going to play it like a board game.
But it's so pretty.
It is. It is.
It also fits in the box.
Depending on how many expansions you've actually got, if ever there was a prize for the number of expansions you could get through a game, I think Memoir 44. I hate to think just how many expansions there has been for the Memoir 44 game. countless. And the trouble is, of course, one of these things, if there's only a certain number of them that are still in print. So, depending on how completist you are as a board gamer, going back now and starting to play Memoir 44 could be problematic because you can't get hold of a lot, and several of the expansions are actually very, very useful.
Speaking of expansions, what really got me into Commands and Colors was, I was listening to you and Henry on View from the Veranda talk about it, and I thought, well, what's a cheap way for me to get into it? And was on one of the forums, I forget which one, and I found a guy who was looking to get rid of a copy of Battle Cry, and he was looking for orc miniatures. And I thought, well, the only orcs I have are these Chronopia figures. So I traded them off far too many Chronopia orcs and got Battle Cry, and I was kind of underwhelmed with what I got. And then shortly thereafter, I was talking to a friend of mine, because I knew he was into Commands and Colors, and I was talking to him about it. And he said, tell you what, I'm looking to get rid of a bunch of stuff anyway. I'm tired of carting this stuff all over the country. His wife's a U.S. Army officer, and they move every 2 to 3 years. So how about I sell you my Commands and Colors Ancients collection for $100? I thought, that's pretty reasonable. What all you got? Well, I've got the base system and the first 3 expansions. So,
whoa, bargains!
Your friend is now missing an arm, I take it.
So I lucked into the first 3 expansions of Commands and Colors Ancients, and you know what? I have never played any of the scenarios out of the other 3 expansions because I have so much fun with the base, just trying to figure out various ways of making the different scenarios work. For example, elephants. Elephants are a tough nut to crack. How to use them. They're so brittle because there's only 2 blocks in a unit. And just so folks understand, in Ancients at least, your basic infantry units, all infantry units have 4 blocks to them, so they can take 4 hits before the unit is removed from the table. Most cavalry units have 3, and then there's 3 blocks, and there's special units that have 2 blocks. So your chariots, elephants, war machines, that sort of thing. And once a unit is removed, your opponent gets a victory banner. And for most Ancients games, the victory condition is a certain number of victory banners. So in a game like Zama, the Zama scenario, you're looking at putting 3 units of elephants out on the table, and then they go away pretty quickly, and all of a sudden your opponent has 3 victory banners. And in a game where the victory condition,
they can cause a lot of damage.
They can cause a lot of damage if they don't get shot up first, and that's really.
I was going to say they can, but how many people have actually managed to do that?
and it's. It's definitely a good illustration of why people use skirmishers, because you can engage them with your light troops, probably not take that much damage, and get rid of them pretty quickly. That's one of the things about the game, is just figuring out how to leverage your strengths against your opponent's weaknesses. And that's true in any game, but it's really acute in Commands and Colors, I think, because you're limited by the cards that you have in your hand, not only in the number of cards that you have, but the options that those cards represent. And the way I think of it is those cards represent momentary situational advantages that your field commanders are able to spot and act upon. And some people complain about that. Oh, I don't get to do what I want. Well, you know what? That's how command works. You can't always do what you want, and that's called friction. And one of the definitions of war game I've heard is if there's no friction, then it's not a war game.
Yeah.
And Commands and Colors has friction in spades, for sure, because you as playing the role as the general in your helicopter view of the table, you can see stuff as it's happening. You want to be able to react to it. Maybe you can't. So you just got to slog through the cards that you have and take advantage of the situations that you can take advantage of. And I think that's one of the really subtle, you mentioned subtlety about the game. That's one of the subtle things about the game that I really enjoy is you have to, being able to find those situations and act upon them.
Yeah.
So.
Neil actually gave me a really good bit of advice, because I was chatting to him when I started playing the Ancients games, because the scenarios, they are not what we would class in wargaming as balanced scenarios. These are scenarios that are based on actual battles, and as close as possible, they put down the actual battle lines. what Neil told me to do was to play each scenario twice, but swap sides.
Absolutely.
And then add up the number of victory points you got in total, and that tells you who actually won.
Yeah.
And it's a great way of doing it.
No, when I was playing a lot, I was working an evening shift, so I'd go into work at 3, get off about 10, and I'd meet a friend of mine at a local shop on a Friday night, because by the time I got home, the kids and wife were in bed anyway, so it didn't matter if I got home at 11:30 or 1 or even 2. So I'd meet him. We'd both get to the shop about 10:15. It was open late for gaming. Get there about 10:15, set up, play both sides of a scenario, tear down, and talk, and be done by midnight. So that definitely speaks to the strength of the game, just simply from being able to get games in.
It's interesting from a gaming perspective as well. Yeah, we talk about it as a war game. If you come at it from the board game angle, it's a game about hand management as far as card management is concerned. But it's also a game about resource management, especially where you have the versions of the game that use the extra deck. So, as I say, we've got Battle Law, which uses, first edition Battle Law. I don't know about second edition, but certainly first edition Battle Law, which uses effectively a spell deck. You've got the Great War, which uses a tactics deck. That tactics deck has now appeared in the Napoleonic version, and with those, actually, as you go through the game, depending on what you roll on your dice, one of the dice faces actually starts to generate resource tokens, which you can then use to play these tactics cards. And these tactics cards can either enhance a card that you're playing, or maybe can be played to cause problems for your opponent. And adding that second deck with that extra bit of resource management and that extra bit of decision making, for me, actually it doesn't completely change the game, but it certainly adds a whole large wrinkle to the way the mechanics works. I'm hoping they'll do that for Ancients as well. The problem is Ancients is so far down the line, and obviously when they produce a tactics deck for in the Napoleonic expansion, you actually get 2 different card decks, because some of the tactics deck, they've taken some of the standard cards out, and they're now in the tactics deck, so they're a different option. But say it adds an extra wrinkle into the game. It means that they play slightly longer, but for the added depth and choices it gives, I really think it's worth it. So for example, if someone was buying, was it a historical gamer, and buying Napoleonics, I would recommend that they get the 5th expansion. If you're buying the Great War, it's already in there. But it's a really interesting addition to the game, and I was really pleased when GMT did that expansion for Napoleonic.
The Samurai Battles has that also.
Yes, I was forgetting. Yes, I know. It's been a while since I played Samurai Battles, and of course, the added advantage with Samurai Battles is the fact that it has those superb, although incredibly fiddly, as Vezda 20 mil Samurai.
And you just like Samurai, let's face it, Neil.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm a huge Samurai fan, but I mean, when you have a 20 mil plastic Samurai that comes in 7 pieces, mounted Samurai is in
worse than some of the Plastic Soldier Company 15 mil figures before they figured out it was a dumb idea. Yeah. We have missed a bit. Speaking as someone who the only board game / war game version of Command and Colours I own is the Great War, and I back that for the figures. I play it as a computer game.
Yes.
The first thing I got into was Memoir 44, because that was available on the Mac. It was one of the few war games you could play on the Mac at one point.
And Battle Lore is on iOS also.
And the other one, there was very briefly, before Fantasy Flight jumped on them with several very large pairs of hobnail boots, there was a game called Viking Lore on iOS, which was basically a clone.
Yeah.
And of course, if you have Vassal,
or Roll20 or any of a number of other similar.
Yeah, there are. Yes, I mean, for years I played Command and Colours against an opponent on Vassal, and we played through the first 3 expansions on Ancients completely on Vassal. Yeah, turn based, playing a turn a day or so, a turn or a couple of turns a day or so.
But yeah, I have never actually played Command and Colours as a physical game.
Well, you might as well go whole hog, get 28mm figures together. I'll make you up a 6-inch hex mat and go at it that way.
Tempting.
Yeah. Or
So-
just by winning games. Okay, so...
Or I could actually break the shrink wrap on Great War.
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, that'd be an idea.
Yeah. So seeing Mike hasn't actually played a physical game, which one would we recommend that he plays?
Ooh.
Who wants to go first?
And here is the problem, because they all have something going for them.
If you're looking for a straight, simple introduction to the game, I think Battlecry or Ancients would be your best introduction, because they're the most, I don't want to say pared down, but they're just simply the simplest versions of the game. They don't have the additional lore decks or tactic decks.
If you add the rider that's actually available and relatively cheap, what then changes?
No.
They just redid Battlecry for the 150th anniversary, so there's a ton of the original sets out there, pretty cheap, and it comes with figures as opposed to blocks also.
I bought the 150th editions primarily because I thought I should own something that was American Civil War, because it would kind of, and I'm a bit of a completist when it comes to my Command and Colours collection, because I think, with the exception of Abaddon and and Battles of Westeros, I own all of these. Anyway, but the one thing I love with the 150th edition of Battlecry is that it is beautifully produced. The cards and the board and everything for that game, they did a fantastic job with it. It is the very base version of the game, but it's a beautiful edition. It's really nice.
I haven't looked, but I'd imagine it's not terribly expensive. I mean, it was Avalon Hill / Hasbro production, so they made a boatload of them. So it wouldn't be that expensive. I would almost argue, well, my favorite version of the game is the Napoleonics, because the additional nuance, see, in at least in Ancients and in Battlecry, and in Samurai Battles for that matter, I forget, the units do not degrade in capability as you remove blocks.
Napoleonics is unique in that it's the only version of the game where it degrades the unit.
Yeah, and that makes for some very subtle differences in your decision making process. Whereas in Ancients, you're almost always going to want to try to take out the heavy units first if you're engaged by multiple units. And there's a lot of decisions that go into what order do I fight in, and what unit do I attack with which of my units. And that calculus changes drastically with Napoleonics. That's a pretty huge wrinkle to throw into a game, even without any tactics cards. Well, you could probably get Battle Lore First Edition for pretty cheap too, for that matter.
If you can find it these days, it's essentially out of print. So if anybody's willing to sell it to you,
I was noting on eBay that there's unpunched copies of the first edition Battlecry going for not very much money.
Well, there you go.
And the Wizards of the Coast is actually the 150th, is it?
Well, yeah,
yes.
Well, I guess. Well, they're a Hasbro company anyway.
All right, I suppose so. Yeah, that seems to be going for about £70 over here, or if you buy it from the States, considerably less.
And the shipping's going to kill you.
Yeah, for $50, I can get someone to ship that for my next visit to the States.
There you go. So yeah, I mean, any one of these is going to give you the same. I'm not going to say it's the same experience. You're going to get the same base experience with quite a bit of nuance layered on. So I guess really the question is, with all the different eras available to you, just pick the era that you like the most.
Yeah, definitely. The beauty of going for the Ancients and the Napoleon version is there are an awful lot of expansions which do allow you to go into different fields, or different parts of the overall conflict. So it's what you really. It depends which way you want to go. With Ancients, you can go full down the Roman route quite easy by using expansions 2, 3, and 4. Or you can go down the Peloponnesian route, which is what I did by using expansion 1 and 5. So
it's worrying how expert you sound at this, despite having not had the game for more than 6 months, Hobbsy.
Yeah. I really got into
6-5 is epic, mate.
Oh, yeah.
6 is the Spartan one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just so folks understand, epic means that it's a larger multiplayer version of the game. So for Commands and Colors Ancients, for example, the standard board is 9 hexes deep by 13 hexes wide. The epic version is 9 hexes deep by 26 hexes wide.
Yeah.
So it's a much larger game at that point. Oh, and Epic Napoleonics is coming out this year.
It is, yeah. It should be.
They've just shipped the P500 edition, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Memoir 44 has a version which was called the Overlord version.
Mm-hmm.
That's a similar sort of thing. I know I was pulling your leg online about Battle Lore. Interestingly, first edition Battle Lore did it differently.
Yeah.
In the fact of, although it was 2 boards side by side, they switched the board around the other way.
Yeah.
So it made it both a slightly wider but a much deeper board, which is interestingly then Memoir 44 produced a set of boards called Breakthrough boards, which effectively did the same sort of thing. Normally boards are so again, rather than being 13 wide and 9 deep, it was I think it was 13 wide and I think it was either 12 or 13 deep. Also, the Great War has a deeper board. The Great War is 13 by 11. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's amazing. It's amazing what difference two hexes makes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, obviously, from the Great War point of view, the reason they did it was to make sure that you could get the intricacies of 2 and 3 lines of trenches in the game. Because obviously, one of the features with World War One was that these intricate trench systems, which were 2, 3 or more layers deep, and that's why they kind of widened the board a bit.
You don't really appreciate the difference that makes until you have to start retreating, and then your unit is basically up against a brick wall, and if it retreats off the table, it retreats off the table, and that's it. So.
Have either of you guys played the Epic version with multiplayer?
Oh yes. I've had great success with.
How does it play? Because you have one person handing out cards, and then up to 3 people each taking an area of the battlefield, don't you?
Yeah, it's great fun, and that's really where I'm wanting to go with my fantasy project, is a full 8-player game with basically 1 overall commander and 3 sub commanders on each side. And it's a real challenge because, at least in the Ancients version, it states, if you're the main commander, you can only talk to one of your sub commanders per turn.
Yeah,
and so you hand a sub commander a card, and it's up to them to interpret your intent with that card. If they don't do what you want them to do, well, that's friction right there. It's a good. Not even a good, it's a great simulation of battlefield command challenges because, for lack of a better term, they're getting their marching orders from waving flags in a certain way, or a particular tune on a horn, or a particular rhythm on drums. And
of course, the battlefield commanders, the 3 guys playing the card in command of each flank, are not allowed to talk to each other.
Right.
Yeah, it does make. We did a series of games. Well, it was organised by a guy called Andy Lawrence. We did when I was at Similar to Wargames in Coventry. We did a series of those at the Society of Ancients Battle Day, where we did that, and huge amounts of fun.
Yeah, I've run Commands and Colors Epic Ancients once at a convention, at Recruits Convention, using the boards and the blocks, and I had 8 players, and it was a heck of a lot of fun. Especially when you've got guys that, until then really had never even met each other, which to a certain degree is somewhat accurate for certain battles during the Ancients period as well. And then I've run it twice at my Wargames weekend using Zama. Well, all 3 times I used the Zama scenario. But for my Wargames weekend is when I rolled out the 4-inch hex mat, and I used paper stand-ups from Junior General website. And I scaled them so that they were about 6 millimeters high, and just used the paper stand-ups for everything. And it ended up looking pretty good, and everyone who played had a whole lot of fun. So that's really what it's about, right? Just having some fun. And
oh yeah,
it's a blast. It really is a blast when you get that many people playing a single game, no matter what the game is. But as long as if it's rolling quickly and it's moving along nicely, and you can get some type of decision going, that's a whole lot of fun. And that's exactly what I'm looking to do with my fantasy game.
Yeah, you mentioned this briefly, Jason. So what are you doing with the fantasy game, and why aren't you using battle law?
Okay, well, for the long answer, you can look on my blog. Basically, what it comes down to is when I started it, I didn't realize that Battle Lore did have an Epics version. So I started with Commands and Colors Ancients, or Epic Ancients, as my template to go off of. And pretty much everybody, well, to backtrack a little bit, seeing the reports from the Ayton games and these huge games that Henry and his friends put on really got me inspired to do something like that, a big game that I could run at my weekend that everybody can contribute to. And we've kicked around a couple ideas before on what we could do, and I started thinking about it, and what does everybody in the group have at least some of? And everyone has, for the most part, has some type of 28 millimeter fantasy figures. Whether it's Warhammer figures or Chronopia or Clan War or War Gods of Aegyptus or even historical armies, whether that's medieval or ancient, pre-gunpowder basically. So everybody's got something. So last year I tried putting a fantasy veneer on Shot, Steel, and Stone from our own Henry Hyde. And that didn't work out so well, and that was my fault because I was not familiar enough with the rules to make it work properly for the players. And then I went ahead and started thinking about it. I thought, well, I'm really, really familiar with Commands and Colors Ancients. The Epic version allows us to do 8 players to a side. Let's just do that. And so that's where that started. And this upcoming weekend at my brother's game weekend, I'm going to be running a 2-player version with my Skaven against my friend Chris Copeland's Samurai. So in the meantime, I've prepared a 6-inch hex mat that's 9x13, and you can see that on my Twitter feed. I think I might have made a blog post about it also. We'll have basically 4 infantry figures to a base, and then 4 bases to an infantry unit. So we're looking at 16 figure units. 2 cav figures to a base, 3 bases, so 6 cavalry figures to a unit, and then 2 war machines or 2 chariots or whatnot to a unit. So I think it's got the potential to be really, really great looking. It's going to have, it'll be a truly epic game because, if you do the math, that's 6-inch hexes with 13 wide, that's 6.5 feet. Well, if you take the epic version of it, that's going to be 13 feet wide. And I think once it's all said and done, it's going to look pretty good, and it's going to be a fun time also.
Smaller than an 8 table.
What's that?
Smaller than the 8 tables.
Yeah,
they were about 20 feet long, if memory serves.
Yeah. Well, there's only so much you can do with the system unless someone. Well, I guess you could do 2 simultaneous epic games, I guess.
Got him thinking now.
But no, I mean we're kind of limited on space also, and about 8 people is all I'm gonna have interested in playing this anyway. Now, more than 8 people show up to my weekends, but there's enough space where guys can go in a different room and play a different game if they're not interested in what's in the main event. So there's a little bit something for everybody. I've got a crap ton of painting to do, but that's all right. I think it's going to be worth it in the end run. I've got close to 300 Skaven figures at this point, and about 60 of them are painted. So
Hang on, didn't you say you were doing this next weekend?
I didn't say they'd all be painted. Never once did I say they'd all be painted.
Oh, heresy!
No,
heresy.
come now. No, my intent is by the summer is to have them all painted, and then I've got another 200 or so undead, which will also be on the same side for the big game. And then our friend Eric, who is a longtime attendee to these weekends, he bought a boatload of the pre-painted D&D orcs and goblins. So he'll bring his horde along, and then if we have the same opponents that we had last time, it'll be a big mob of hairy, naked, screaming barbarians, the samurai, and then elves and dwarves opposing them. So, knock on wood, everything's going to come together, and it won't be a terrible experience. But I'm pretty confident that the guys that are going to be playing have played Commands and Colors also, so that'll help kind of get things moving in an expeditious manner. Yeah.
It does sound good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and luckily I got an airbrush this past Christmas, so hopefully that'll speed up my painting quite a bit, and we'll get moving. Unfortunately, here in the Midwest, you've got a very narrow window that you can prime using spray cans, so hopefully this'll help out.
Go in the garage, get a little fan heater, spray him in there, and chuck the fan heater on him.
Yeah. Well, it's currently 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not even sure a little fan heater is going to help with that.
Maybe a slightly bigger fan heater for you guys.
It's interesting you're going along that particular route with the fantasy stuff, but to be fair, the system lends itself to applying as we've seen with the amount of different versions of the game that have actually been produced over the years. The system lends itself quite naturally to lots of different periods. Yeah, because at its heart, it's fundamentally really, really simple. Really simple. That's the one thing that we need to kind of never get away from, is that over the years, some people, there have been several people who've turned around and say, well, we like Command and Colors, but for example, with things like your units don't have flanks. And various other bits and pieces, and they tinker with it and play with it, and sorry, when I say units don't have flanks, they don't have facings, and so it's like, well, yeah, it's fine, but it doesn't quite do things. But
no, your units don't have flanks and facings, but your force does.
What I'm trying to get at is that it is what it is, and if you take it at the level it is produced at. I know some people have complained about the way you play cards, and potentially, you can only particularly you are limited in what you can move, and sometimes you can only move one unit. And it's like, well, would you really do that? And what does that represent from from an historical point of view? But I think if you just take a step backwards and take the game for what it is. There is an abstraction there. There is no getting away. Well, with every game, there's an abstraction, and there's a particular way that that CNC is abstracted. But if you operate within that, it's incredibly flexible.
Yeah, and I hate to make this my last point, but I'm coming up against a hard wall here, time-wise. What I think those cards represent, as I said earlier, is the local commander spotting an opportunity and acting on it in a large fashion. So that's not to say your other units aren't doing something. They probably are doing something. They're just not doing it in a particularly decisive fashion, if that makes sense.
There's an argument to which, in fact, you should treat it as similar to I Ain't Been Shot by a Chain of Command, in that you should stop getting wedded to the idea that you have to move all your units every turn. Right, and that's friction for you. You don't get to do everything you want. Reach it. And that's something that I'm kind of struggling with my own, attempts at designing games. Is I like that friction aspect,
and how do you model that on the table? And well, that's, friction is just like I said earlier, if your game doesn't have friction, it's not a war game.
The thing you have to remember is C&C is a board game that allows you to play a large mass battle in a short period of time.
Yep.
If you want anything more, go and play a large mass battle war game and spend a weekend doing it.
Yeah. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but
Nope.
This gives you the Commands and Colors system gives you the opportunity to play a full battle game in under an hour.
Yeah. It scratches an itch.
Yep.
Indeed.
Very, very nicely.
On that note,
I was going to say that.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead then.
No.
Yeah, as you say, I think unfortunately we could talk for a while longer about this, but unfortunately some people have to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, let's plan on this.
And I'm freezing to death here.
Well, why don't we plan on meeting back up after my games weekend and see how it all went?
That sounds like a tremendously good idea.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, let's do
so
that.
So that's in the summer, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I call my weekend. It's referred to colloquially as J3, and that stands for Jay's July Jamboree. And this is going to be the 7th one coming up this year, and it's just a whole lot of fun. So, open invitation to you three guys and Dave if he happens to get over this way. If any of you get over this way in July, you've got an open invitation to attend.
Which far-flung corner of the States are you in?
I'm in Illinois. I'm in just about in the dead center of the country. I'm actually, my house sits 3 miles from the Mississippi River.
And this is taking place in a winery, you say?
Yes.
Just wanted to...
Meeples road trip.
I'm currently already heading for the States in August, so I think that may have to wait.
Okay. Fair enough. But so on that note, Neil, Mr. Hobbs, Mr. Whitaker, thank you so much for coming on the Veteran Wargamer. I appreciate it greatly. And
Jay, it's been fantastic to have you on the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. And guys, I look forward to speaking further again with you in the future, and of course, listening to the great podcasts you put out.
Yeah, indeed. And
now I've subscribed.
Indeed, Jay, and all the very best with the Veteran Wargamer, and thank you for what you've done so far, and we look forward to what you're doing in the future. It's a really good show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, your show is definitely one of the inspirations for me starting the Veteran Wargamer, so it's high praise indeed coming for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. We always love to hear from you, our listeners. You can contact us in a couple of ways. You can do that via email at mailbag@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk, or you can now leave a voicemail message for us. The number to call is 0116 318 4114. Please note, call charges may apply. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
By our standards, relatively short.
Indeed. Well, it was constrained by the fact that, first off, Jay was up in the horrendously early hours of a Sunday morning, and by the sound of things, it's not very warm in his part of the world. So, and of course, he was constrained by the fact that he then had to go out. Huge kudos to Jay for taking 3 hours out of his very early Sunday morning to speak to us. The dedication of a podcaster, you see.
3 non-existent hours out of his Sunday morning, almost. I mean, seriously, 6 a.m.?
It exists Monday to Friday, just about. Weekend, not so sure.
Just.
Yeah.
But the big question is, have we convinced Mr. Whitaker to try Commands and Colors?
Maybe.
Well, obviously, what's going to have to happen is that when we get together for this epic game of Dungeon Saga that we've been invited to, which you won't know about yet because you haven't listened to that show because we haven't published it. But I shall have to take a box of something along with me, and have to give it a go in the flesh and see what you think. But the other thing, I'm not overly convinced that we ever answered the question, because we ran out of time, it's which is your favourite version of Command and Colours? Now, obviously, Mike has a limited thing to go at because he's only played it online.
Memoir 44 has to be said.
Memoir 44 online it's a very good implementation of the game.
It's a very fine implementation, I have to say.
It is very good.
The two I would probably look at are completely disparate ends of the spectrum. I'm tempted by Battlecry simply because I don't have any ACW, and it does look very pretty. And I am a huge Game of Thrones fan.
Oh, right, okay. Mr. Hobbs.
Mr. Shuck, you finish.
Me finish, okay.
You haven't told us which is your favourite one.
But I'm really struggling. If I had to choose, ultimately, I think Battle Law First Edition has a particular place in my heart. I do really like that implementation of the game. It's a great version of the game, but it's really well produced. Days of Wonder do fantastic production on their board games, and Battle Law was whereas Memoir 44 was used slightly more washed out and muted colours, because Battle Law was fantasy. For whatever reason, it was the greens were a bit greener. It was a bit more vibrant, and it's a very pretty game, and lots of plastic miniatures. So I do like Battle Law, but Ancients is great. Napoleonic is great. Push comes to shove. First edition Battle Law.
I think you could have labelled that a little bit more, mate.
I'm not biting.
We had noticed. Hobbsy.
I've got to say Ancients. I think it's... Well, it allows me to play some really, really interesting battles in periods. And because it's quite a stripped-down version, which is probably the wrong way to describe it. But there's no sort of extra fluff around it. It is almost like a purist's version, I suppose, of the game.
Yeah.
Although I haven't played Battlecry, which is the first one. But I think the Ancients game, it makes you think about command an awful lot. It makes you think about what your generals are doing, and that I think is always the key for an Ancients game. It's the Ancients games for me seem to revolve around strong commanders getting troops to do what they really don't want to do, which is go and engage the enemy at close, very close. It just covers that quite nicely. I'm getting more into the Napoleonic version though now, having bought it and having got the expansion for the generals and tactician cards. But yeah, I think it's got to be Ancients.
Yeah, it's a good choice. Yeah, it's a good choice. There isn't a bad game amongst them. I haven't played the sci-fi version. Everything else, there isn't a bad game amongst them. Depending on your sense of aesthetics, people might not like GMT because the GMT versions use wooden blocks and stickers as opposed to miniatures, whereas all the others use little plastic minis for the units. Having said that, as you say, the two versions that GMT currently produced are vying for some of the best ones. So it is really interesting that over the space of, where are we, 16 years, you've come out with what is now 9 games, all in different periods using the same basic system, but ultimately they're all good games to the point where I would argue it's certainly worth owning multiple different versions. Some people might turn around and say, well, I've got Command and Colours Ancients, so I've got Command and Colours, and there is an argument to turn around and say, well, no, you've got one version of it, and actually, if you went out and bought the Great War, for example, that would give you, although it's the same game, it gives you a different gaming experience. So no matter what version you get, they are good games. Can't recommend them highly enough, to be honest. Really can't. That they are, and as I say, Mr. Hobbs in our last podcast, talked about getting into Command and Colours, and that being one of the things that are converted into board games.
Yeah, definitely.
But
All I will say, Mike, when it comes to when you start unpacking the Great War, be careful taking the figures off the spoon.
Oh,
Use clippers, otherwise you're...
and even then, yes, the amount of bayonets you may well lose.
Yeah. Get new sharp clippers and take your time.
It's a good game, mate. Good game. Get out of the box. Get out of the box.
So people keep telling me.
Mind you, if we turn around to each other and said, get that game out of the box, it doesn't bear thinking about how many games we'd have to unpack.
Or the rest of us have to go and buy. We are slowly but surely synchronizing our gaming collections.
Least I've unpacked Dungeon Saga.
I've unpacked mine. I'm in the middle of blog post 2.
Oh, right. Oh, crikey. Oh.
I have to admit, I'm currently seriously considering seeing if I can get someone to trade me Star Wars Armada for some Star Wars Imperial Assault expansions. And that's still in its shrink wrap.
Excellent. Well, at the moment, I've got Dave Hickman. Hello, Dave, who has just purchased Imperial Assault. So all I need now is to finally convince Mr. Luff to purchase Dungeon Saga, and job done.
Yes.
Excellent stuff. Well, on that note, shall we wrap up, gentlemen?
I think so.
Once again, it remains to be said, thank you once again for taking the time out on a very dismal, actually, Sunday afternoon. Mr. Whitaker, thank you for joining us, sir.
You're welcome.
We shall let you go. We shall let you whiz away, go and warm up and get some lunch.
Yeah, it's noting the drawback of the new office in that it is at the cold end of the house. My nearest radiator is 30 feet away.
Oh dear.
So it's podcasting in a woolly jumper, is it?
Yeah, except I left that upstairs.
Oh, I don't know. Thank you to the Welsh Wizard.
Thank you
for joining us and for sharing everything with us, including his cold.
The chest infection. That's why I'm off.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Flu and everything. Yes. It's not just man flu. Honest. Yeah. Thank you both for joining us, and Faith, thank you once again to J. Arnold. Had a great chat. Appreciate it, mate. And we look forward to getting him back on the show at the end of August time to talk about how his version of Fantasy Command & Colours went. So until next time, take care. Happy gaming, and we'll speak to you really soon.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, why not share it with others by leaving us a review on iTunes? And if you have any comments or questions, you can always email the show. The address is info@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. And you can also visit our webpage, where you'll find a complete episode archive, all the View from the Veranda podcasts, rules reviews, and our blog of hobby items and news, which is updated several times a week. This is also where you'll find the links to our presence on social media, and here you can follow us on Twitter or join our Facebook group. And finally, here you can also find details should you wish to support us by making a donation to the podcast. All this on the Meeples and Miniatures website, www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.